Welcome to episode 72 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Joined, as always, am I by my co-host, Dalton Willie. Dalton, we are back after a couple of weeks off. First of all, how are things with you? Dressed quite nicely, quite dapper over there on the other side of the screen. And second off, how ready are you to be talking about fantasy football again?
Oh, well, guests get to see me on a Friday when I actually look presentable since I work from home. But I am incredibly ready for it. This is the doldrums for me. I don't like the NBA. I'm getting into hockey, but just barely. So there's nothing going on for me sports wise, nothing to do, and there's not even I can't even do beat street because there's not a lot of beat reporting going on around camps. So I'm stuck in La La Land watching Gabriel Davis get argued about every single day on Twitter with the same arguments. So I am incredibly excited that we're almost to pad practice. We get to talk about some guys.
Boy, the Gabriel Davis thing is really wearing me out. I'm glad we don't have AFC this week. I think purely for that reason. I'm imagining, because I knew you were going to lift after you got off of work. I'm imagining like that's what you wore to go to the gym and lift. So if we had honestly, Eli, pretty dedicated listener, fantastic graphic designer. Eli, if you want to try your hand at like a cartoon version of Dalton lifting in a polo, like that would be amazing.
Look good, feel good. Those are the rules.
Okay, on this week's show, we have the NFC preview. And Dalton, we were talking about before we got on, you mentioned it to me. The NFC just isn't quite as inspiring as the AFC, but I think there's still some interesting storylines in this conference. It's just there's a whole like handful of teams that just feel like we shouldn't care about, but at the same time, I think they're important to at least think about, especially this early on, because we are going to end up caring about guys on all of these teams, even the teams that we think are truly terrible. It's just tough to peg all those guys.
Yeah, and you're right. I am not excited about the NFC, and I think part of it is just the quarterback play in that division is substantially worse than the AFC. But just like Brandon Cooks last year, there are guys on horrible teams who you're going to start every week because they're just target monsters. It's just this division it does not look set to be the same. Outside of the NFC West, even, I would say this entire division is Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC West. And after that, it gets kind of messy.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I would say one of the other teams that you could throw in like that next up category, it will start off with them, is the Dallas Cowboys. Dalton, and I didn't even say what we were doing here. We each picked like one storyline that we're keeping an eye on. This will be, we'll do like a training camp preview where we talk about some key training camp storylines, but these are just like one storyline per team that we're keeping an eye on these next couple of weeks and clear up until draft season. And even something that, like, from my perspective, when I did this, my opinions on these things will be evolving throughout the season as they should. And I think some of these storylines, like how they play out, is really going to impact how I see these teams this year. So without further ado, Dalton, Dallas Cowboys, what do you got?
Well, I had to hit it with the big name in that wide receiver group. And I'm just asking myself, is CeeDee Lamb worth a top 5 wide receiver ADP? Right now, an underdog, he's at 6, and he's barely off of that 5 spot, right underneath Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Cooper Kupp. And looking at him, I mean, last year, the Dallas Cowboys played incredibly fast. They were the number 1 offense in the NFL in snaps per play every 28 seconds. 2 years ago, they were number 2 in the NFL at 27 seconds. And 3 years ago, they were number 2 in the NFL at 28 seconds. So they play fast, and there's a lot of plays. There's a lot of fancy points to be had. And this wide receiver room is not as strong as it's been in years past with the departure of Amari Cooper. Lamb has gotten better every year in his both years. He went up in his PFF receiving grade from a 72 to an 84. His yards per reception went up from a 12 to a 14, and his yards per route run went up from 1.7 to 1.9. He's gotten incredibly better both years. And I think this year Dak is a little healthier, and they might be willing to air the ball out a little more. And that defense is probably not going to have as many turnovers, which is going to result in them playing a lot more competitive games. So I really think that CeeDee Lamb is worth a top 5 wide receiver. And I think he might be that guy in the top 10 who has that wide receiver 1 upside that's kind of sneakily getting passed on right now.
I should have pulled up our ranks. I'll do that right now as I talk. I don't remember where I actually had CD ranked in our initial ranks. But I think that's interesting. And, obviously the thing with CD Lamb that on a very surface level, everybody is going to be talking about is, well, there's no Amari Cooper. Obviously, he's not going to get all of those Cooper targets. But I think one thing that you and I both talked about when the Cooper thing went down was, well, now it's really opened up for CD Lamb to move all over the formation, to be basically the best version of himself, use his versatility, his multi-skill skill set, and just be a weapon all over the field for the Cowboys. And I think if he is able to do that, like, I can totally see the upside for a top 5 receiver for sure. I'm pulling up my ranks right now. Receiver. So I have him at 7, you have him at 6. So like we're both right there on very fringe top 5 status. The thing that's hard is it's just like, my top 5: Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams. Like that's just a loaded top 5. I think we would probably both agree once you get past, well, you and I don't agree on Tyreek Hill, but if we just put CD Lamb at 6 for both of us, maybe Deebo Samuel 7, but after that, you start to feel a lot less good about the rest of those guys.
Yeah, and if we were to do tiers, I think CeeDee Lamb would be the last tier 1 of those guys who you really feel comfortable with and you never have to worry about. But I just feel like this offseason, he is not getting the same love as those other top 5 guys are getting talked about, at least in my opinion. And I think Dallas as a whole is pretty underrated.
I think that's partially because Lamb has gotten a lot of love. I think especially before last season, everybody projected a huge leap for him. And he was really good last year, but he wasn't quite that elite guy that people had hoped for. So I'm wondering if maybe it's just like people got burned a little bit last year and they just don't want to fully dive in, because that's just human nature when it comes to a lot of these guys. Like Saquon Barkley, like there's probably no reason for us to both have him, for anyone to have him like mid-teens, even with how bad the Giants are. But it's like, kind of have to hedge a little bit, like just emotionally for myself after having him number 1 2 years ago, and then I don't remember what last year, but surely ranked high, and that did not go
He was
well.
a sleeper for me last year, so
yeah. So mine, do we get the full Tony Pollard experience this year? And this is not something that I don't think we're going to even be able to learn in training camp. Like, unless we hear just the most major Tony Pollard hype, like he just looks like a totally different guy. Like he's moving all over the field, like lining up in the slot. Like this guy's going to be such a weapon for the Cowboys this year. There's no way to know this before draft time, but this is why he's probably one of my favorite running backs in that range of guys to take, because there is an outcome where we do get, like, even if we get a 50-50 or even a 60-40, Pollard's going to be super valuable. And I think I mentioned Cooper leaving as a boom for Lamb, but there's just, after Cooper and then after Zeke, there's a third role, like the number 3 role in that offense is up for grabs. And I think if Pollard can be used as more than just a running back, just as a weapon, just as an offensive weapon, I think that role is actually there for the taking. And maybe, like, I think that, like, this doesn't really change how I impact Lamb, but how Pollard is used, I think will have a big impact on everybody else in that offense. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not exactly a buyer in Dalton Schultz as like an elite option. Like I think I've seen some people have him top 5, top 6. I just can't, or maybe top 5. I just can't quite get there. So I think if Pollard actually gets that chance and is just an all-around weapon this year, that's super interesting for him, and that's going to really shape that offense this year.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you. First, I think Schultz was a beneficiary of just not being keyed in on last year. And that's going to change this year with just the structure of how Dallas's offense is going to play out. But then again, Gallup isn't going to be healthy until maybe September, October. We're not sure on how that recovery is going along. Jalen Tolbert would be the next guy after CeeDee Lamb.
I like Tolbert. I like him a lot in redraft. I'm curious. I have not looked this deep in the ADP. I'm curious who's going higher, he or or Michael Gallup, but I'm very interested in having Tolbert shares this year.
Oh, I think Tolbert's definitely going lower than Gallup still,
Yeah.
but I'm a firm believer. I think Tolbert's pretty interesting. It's one of those small school guys who put up elite numbers at a small school. Always like to see that, and definitely could be that vertical threat in that Dallas offense. But on Tony Pollard, he is probably the best handcuff in fantasy football. I don't know if there's another one behind him. Kareem Hunt would be another guy I'd probably put on that list.
Yeah, I don't even know if
then,
Hunt can be considered a handcuff because he has more standalone value consistently. Hopefully this isn't the case, but maybe Michael Carter becomes like the best handcuff in fantasy football this year, or right up there with Tony Pollard. But you just know Pollard's in that top like 3 conversation, absolutely.
And you just know if Zeke goes down, I mean, he's the guy. You know he's amazing. He has some of the best burst speed on the edge I've seen, and I mean he does have standalone value. He was the PPR 28 running back last year. I know Thanksgiving because I played him against you. He had a 40-yard stamper score. So he's definitely a guy that you could start and you can get those rewards because he can pop. He's just so athletic.
I love how I had to get that in there. I do want to say real quick because I don't know if we'll talk much about Pollard or Zeke before the season because I kind of think, well, first of all, what people are doing right now with the Pollard Zeke thing is it's just a little weird to me. People are starting to defend Zeke, say he's ranked way too low. I think we're kind of doing a revisionist history a little bit with him. I know he was hurt for a lot of last season, and people take those splits. But I know what you're going to say. I'm going to say it too. Even at the beginning of the year, I think most people thought Pollard was like outplaying Zeke like the first month of the season.
Look at the first game against the Bucs. Zeke gets it on the 2-yard line. He goes to the left, and he gets stood up by a safety. He gets stood up at the line by a safety and doesn't score a touchdown. I'm not saying Zeke's like a horrible running back because he's not. But the problem is he's not the same old like Zeke eats. We're playing, and you're right, we're playing revisionist history where, running back 17 is a little low for Zeke. But he's not a top 5 talent anymore. I mean, he's just not. And he is definitely in line to get usurped by a guy who's been better than him on the field.
So I would just say my advice to people about Zeke is whatever your opinion was of him a month ago, just keep that opinion. Like there's nothing that really should be swaying you one way or another. It's all just noise at this point right now. Cowboys probably the longest in the division. Next up is the Eagles. I'll start. This is the origin of the YouTube thumbnail, the AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts at Disney World. I am very curious, Dalton, if this is the season where AJ Brown can actually finish the season where his talent indicates that he should. And I say that because he's been good his first 3 years. He's been like a very good receiver, and he's had very good fantasy seasons. He was wide receiver 32, I think his rookie year, but then the last 2, it's been wide receiver 11 and wide receiver 15. But you would just think with how good he is and the reputation that he rightfully earned in Tennessee that he would have a top 10 finish to his name at this point. And so I'm just wondering if he can pull that off this year. Like we talked about him a lot, and I even said a slight downgrade for him, and I have him right outside of my top 10 after the trade. But at the same time, like if this guy, he's going in the year 4, like this would be when he's at the peak of his powers. If Jalen Hurts can actually be like an average to above average passer, which is a big question mark in my mind. But if he can, I think Brown's got all the upside in the world, even with other weapons there. Like I worry less about that and more about the quarterback, but the weapons is kind of the tiebreaker between Tennessee and Philly as far as situation goes. But I don't know. I just think he hasn't quite lived up to what people would think his first 3 years based on his reputation. He's basically right at 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns his first 3 years, like on average. He should put up a 1,412 type of season at some point in his career. We'll see if it can happen this year.
Yeah, well, I think if he was healthy the last 2 years, he was definitely on. I don't know if he was on pace, but I think he might have been close.
He was wide receiver 7 in points per game 2 years ago. So that's another thing that I meant to say. And that's a good point that he's, whether it's been some of his own inconsistencies, some injuries here and there, and then just like up and down nature of the Titans offense. But there's been various reasons why he hasn't gotten there yet.
Well, this ties in to what my question was, is which Philadelphia Eagles team we're going to see. because last year, in weeks 1 through 7, the Eagles were fifth in the NFL in neutral pass rate, 67%. So they were passing pretty frequently. And then from weeks 8 through 18, their neutral pass rate dropped all the way down to 46.8. And I think Nick Sirianni is a good coach. He made adjustments, but he came in making a very obvious point that they wanted to be a pass first offense because I think he knows that's how the NFL works. And then they go in the offseason and they make a huge move for a top tier wide receiver to make that available. And I think we're going to see that pass first offense out the gates again. They also play a less difficult schedule to start it. I mean, I know we're not going to like schedule watch, but they had a gauntlet last year. I mean, they played Kansas City, they played Tampa Bay. So like, even if they were playing well, they were losing games because the teams were just better. This year, I think they started the gate like against Washington and the Giants. So
although I will say, playing the Chiefs defense, especially in September, was not a gauntlet by any means.
That is true. Well, and they did put up points in that game,
but those were all garbage time points. But
true. Yes. And I think that's the biggest thing. Just back to AJ Brown, though. I did have some fun stats for him since he entered the league. He's PFF's number 3 graded wide receiver. Mm-hmm. His yards per route run are 4th in the league at 2.61, and he has a 99% success rate against press coverage from Matt Harmon. That means there's only 1% of the time that press coverage beats him. He's just an athletic freak. I am excited about Philly this year. It's probably my most exciting storyline in the NFC, I would say, just because I want to see what they do. And if they pass more, I think there's a lot of fantasy value on this team. If they run like they did last year, this team is not worth a lot, in my opinion.
I have to say, even with my AJ Brown skepticism as like a top 10 guy, taking him at the 2-3 turn in the 3rd round, which is where he's going right now, that's like one of my favorite things that you can do in drafts as of right now, because you'll be picking high, top 3 or 4 probably if you get them. So you can take that workhorse running back you feel good about, and then you can either go running back or receiver. I personally would probably say receiver at that point, but depends on how it falls. You could realistically leave that with a full-fledged RB1, a wide receiver 1/2, like a high-end 2, low-end 1, and then AJ Brown, who's like could be a 1 quite easily. Yeah. So I just really like that combination. And looking up his ADP is, I saw it was early 3rd. I was like, like maybe this is the year that we finally get the AJ Brown like big year, because it's just these things happen when we least expect it sometimes.
Yeah, and I trust the coaching staff here to try to make that work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dalton, the Giants, this could probably be one that we breeze through pretty quickly unless you have something really revolutionary and interesting on this team here.
It's not. It's all hinges on Daniel Jones. My question is he good? Last year, he played behind PFF's 30th offensive line in grade, but then last year, they also made Saquon Barkley the 43rd ranked running back in PFF grading. So the team was just abysmal. Everybody remembers the 3rd down where they were 8 yards from the 1st down and they ran a QB sneak in their own red zone. I don't know what they were doing. I mean, I think Brian Daboll's an upgrade. Everybody on this team is so cheap. You can get any player you want, including Saquon, way below value if this team is even a medium offense. And I recommend taking some dart throws at them. It just depends who you like, in my opinion.
Yep. I intentionally didn't talk about Saquon this week because I think he's going to be a guy that we spend a lot of time on. Like I'm looking right now, he's the RB10. I think I'm going to have to probably, like I have him at 14 and I struggle with it. But anyway, so mine kind of ties into yours. Can Kenny Golladay, like, does he have a bounce back season in him? I don't think we truly talk about enough just how bad things were for Kenny last year in New York. He played 14 games. Like I know he was banged up here and there, probably playing through injuries at times, but he played in 14 games. The man had 521 yards receiving and 0 touchdowns. You could have had Mecole Hardman on your team and been much happier with the season than if you had a 4th-round pick on him. Yes, and Mecole Hardman was not good for a large chunk of last year. There were 2 big issues last year, and you touched on both of them: quarterback and coach. The coach has changed. The quarterback, however, has not. So I'm curious to see if Daboll, he's a great offensive mind, And then also they bring in the Chiefs guy who was going to be the offensive coordinator when Bieniemy presumably eventually leaves for greener pastures. But so they bring him in to be the offensive coordinator. That's two very good offensive minds coming from very good coaching trees. But it's still Daniel Jones. Kenny Galladay still needs a quarterback that's willing to take chances, make those timing throws for Kenny to succeed. Can Daniel Jones be coached up to do that? Like, this is a make or break year for him. Absolutely. Like, he's probably gone almost, like, unless he has a fantastic year, he's probably gone. And like, if you can get Kenny Galladay at, let me look here. He's very late. Wide receiver 57. If he just has I don't know. I'm trying to even think of how
an 800-yard season, 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, like if you just take somewhere like halfway between what he was in Detroit and what he was last year, that's probably like wide receiver 30, wide receiver 25. And that's a major value late in drafts. But I also totally understand if people want to stay away from him this year after what happened last year. So I think he's an interesting one to watch. And his performance, I think, is a gauge for Daniel Jones, too. So that's also why it's interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I'll say that I haven't heard anybody talk about that I think would be fun, especially now that Baker's all up in Carolina, Jimmy Garoppolo.
I knew where you were going with that.
Yeah. There's an improved offensive line, obviously, the Giants drafted. I think it's going to be better. And they do have a solid unit when it comes to skill position. Mm-hmm. I think that would be interesting. And I think that Jimmy Garoppolo would be in a team, would have coaches who can get something out of him because he's a good passer, probably a better passer than Daniel Jones, just not a better athlete.
I will say the video going around of Jimmy G, like all of his passes, like 20 yards or more on Twitter, not the most flattering thing you've ever seen.
Absolutely not, but still more flattering than the Daniel Jones compilations we have.
Okay, the Washington football team. Speaking of unflattering quarterbacks, Carson Wentz, the starter here. Dalton, what is your WFT storyline to watch?
I think Antonio Gibson is dead is my storyline. I went back because I was curious because he finished as the running back 11 last year. And I was like, that feels really weird because I don't feel like he had a good season. And it turns out he didn't.
Did he rush for a lot of touchdowns? I know he had a lot of rushes, period.
He did, but it's the splits that make it really interesting when McKissick was healthy. Mm-hmm. So when McKissick and Gibson were healthy, which was the first 12 games of the season, Gibson and McKissick had the same number of top 12 performances in 2 apiece. Gibson had 6 top 24 finishes to McKissick's 20 or to McKissick's 5. So he was a little more consistent there. But when McKissick got hurt, it went like this. RB7, RB6, RB36, RB4, RB18 to finish the season. And then week 17, he was RB12. Absolutely went ballistic. We know the football team drafted the Commanders now. We know they drafted.
That's Brian true. The Robinson. Commanders. I'm calling the Washington football team. They have a name now. Unbelievable.
We know they drafted Brian Robinson, and I'm done with the Christian McCaffrey comps because Gibson's not as good as Christian McCaffrey.
I've been done with those.
I know.
I've been done with those. Let me tell you.
And before CMC, it was Jonathan Stewart and Jalen Tolbert, or not Jalen Tolbert, the Cookie Monster Tolbert, and everybody hated that same split in Carolina for years because both those guys were talented backs and they were hard to finish as good fantasy performances for the same reasons. I think Ron Rivera likes a running back by committee approach, and Gibson is probably the guy between the 20s. He's not going to be the guy in third down. He's not going to be the goal line guy. I know he's getting faded hard already. He's like RB26. I am A-okay with continuing to fade him and going for McKissick and even Robinson and his value.
Oh, you're right. Running back 25 on underdogs. Yeah. That is insane. So mine kind of goes along with that. I'm curious if there's anyone who can step up to be the clear third guy in this offense, kind of like Dallas, a less valuable role in a worse offense. But if it is Brian Robinson, who I think is a definite candidate, that is very harmful for Antonio Gibson. And obviously McKissick could just be the third guy because he is eternal. He is McKissick. He is always there. And then you have Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel. Samuel, obviously, like, can he bounce back from the injuries last season? The more I hear about the injuries, the way things unfolded last year, the more it sounds like their coaching staff really mismanaged that whole thing. They tried to rush him back, and he wasn't healthy. Then he got shut down. He should have just had surgery from the get-go.
Yeah.
And then Dotson is a rookie that I don't think people love the upside compared to some of the other receivers.
But the draft capital
in his class,
there.
The draft capital is there. And I think he's a guy that people think can contribute right away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if his upside isn't superstar, he's going to be a good player right away, like pretty good in the NFL, I think. And I think that's what the consensus kind of is. And then there's Logan Thomas, who he also has to bounce back from injury. But when he played last year, he was pretty good. He just was banged up and then blew out his knee. So we'll see what he can come back in and be like. But I don't think Wentz is good by any means, but I think he's good enough to where we actually are. Like, we're not going to have – I think their third leading receiver had 400 and something yards last year. I think we'll see better than that this year.
Yeah, well, I mean,
their second leading receiver, excuse me.
I don't even know the last time this team had a good quarterback. Alex Smith was broken at the point he got to play for them.
I mean, RG3 when he was good for 8 weeks. That's
yeah. What was that? 2014. I mean, it's been a hot minute. And despite, I know Carson Wentz probably sucks and the contract's pretty horrible, but he's still like a top 24 starting quarterback in the NFL. And I don't think the Washington football team has been able to field that for some time.
It's an upgrade from Taylor Heineke to Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and I'm very excited about Terry McLaurin, but everybody is at this point.
Okay, the NFC North, and we can start with, I would say, the most boring team in this division, but the Lions are a little more entertaining. They've got some fun guys. My storyline with the Bears is, does volume carry the day for these guys in Chicago? Because it is going to have to. There are 3 guys who I think we feel confident in at least being on the fantasy radar. That's Mooney, Montgomery, and Cole Kmet. But there is nobody else who is going to provide consistent value. I think Khalil Herbert is the only other guy on that offense who I can even see, like, scratching that. Like,
you don't believe in Byron Pringle?
I don't believe in Pringle. I don't believe in Velus Jones, rookie they drafted, who's probably almost as old as Pringle. Haven't fact-checked that. But
he's younger than Herbert. I fact-checked that. Or older than Herbert, I'm sorry.
I think the Bears are going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year. Their offensive line isn't going to be much better. It should be better, but not like markedly better than last year. I don't think, not on paper. Maybe better coaching and a leap from Fields can make a world of difference, but I'm not so sure I want to count on that. I think Mooney is good. I feel like I'm a little bit lukewarm on him compared to the people who like love him and think he's just this amazing receiver. And now he's the number 1 option because Allen Robinson is completely out the door. Like, even though he is only wide receiver 32 in ADP when I looked at. So like people say these things, but the draft capital in fantasy doesn't really reflect that. And then Cole Kmet, he's a fringe streamer, tight end 13. David Montgomery is the only true starter on this whole team, running back 16. I just think you're going to have, like, going into the season, I think volume is going to have to carry the day for somebody in Chicago to, like, truly be valuable for your fantasy team. Even Montgomery at RB16, he's there because of volume.
Well, and I think part of the interesting thing is I've seen a lot of analysts take Mooney and compare him to Cooks in that they're going to be in a similar role where they're the first read and pretty much the only read in the offense. My concern is that the scouting report on Davis.
How many 1,000-yard seasons has Cooks had at this point?
Exactly. Well, that and the scouting report on Davis Mills coming out of college was he's a first read quarterback. The scouting report on Justin Fields, it's been pretty true, is he holds the ball too long.
Yeah.
And it's resulted in very bad sack games. I hope that Matt Eberflus and co are better than Matt Nagy was as an offensive coordinator. I just don't really see the weapons there to do it. I don't believe that. I mean, this team is going to produce the worst fantasy finishes out of every team in the NFL. I feel comfortable saying that. And that they will probably be one of the teams that lead the league in least amount of plays per game just because they're going to rely heavily on their defense. And it's very obvious they're tanking.
Yes. It was clearly with their offseason moves, it was like, oh, Chicago is playing for 2023.
Yeah, well, they're trying to trade Robert Quinn now. So we know that.
Yes.
My only question here is it Khalil Herbert season? Really didn't do a lot of work on this one because I didn't really care for the Bears. So I did 2 things. One, I went and looked up the Montgomery contract talks. Apparently they stalled because he's asking for over $10 million a year. Chicago would be absurd to do that, by the way. But secondly, Found a little quote from Matt Eberflus. Said, when talking about Herbert, he's just an explosive athlete who can run the whole route tree as you saw today. He had made a great catch. He's been learning a lot. He's a mature young man, and we like him in terms of where he's learning the offense and what kind of man he is. The hope that everybody has is Matt Eberflus and the OC he brought over from Green Bay implement the same thing Green Bay does, where A.J. Dillon is David Montgomery and Aaron Jones is Khalil Herbert. Khalil is one of my favorite late round picks because this is a new organization and they could very quickly just say, we don't like Montgomery. It's your last year. We want to see what we have in Montgomery, Ryan Nall. And then they drafted some kid in the 5th round, I think, and see what they have in those guys. And I think Herbert was better for all intents and purposes last year than Montgomery when he got his chance to start. So he's probably the only guy I'm drafting out of this team. I don't like Cole Kmet. I've said it. Darnell Mooney's a little too expensive for my liking, and I think Justin Fields' ceiling is the floor this year. So
he's QB 17 in what I've seen, but yeah, I mean, you know how much I love Herbert. I was sorely disappointed with how things turned out last year after Montgomery came back and Herbert went back to a pure backup role. I think they would have been.
Well, I believe you famously said on the pod when he came back, you were like, he's going to still have flex value, and then they just completely lost him. They're like, we're not going to put this guy on the field.
Yep, hand up, that was wrong. I don't think that was wrong because of Herbert's quality as a player. I think that was just the Bears being dumb. And if you're looking at their offense, in some order, their 3 best skill guys are Montgomery, Herbert, and Mooney. Kmet's not better than any of those 3 as a tight end.
Well, and about your take, I will say, Bears coaching staff fired. You're still on the podcast. So I'm just saying, you're probably more right than they are.
Well, I made the point. You mentioned the Montgomery piece. I've heard arguments both ways as to how that contract is going to go. I made the point in the Last Chance newsletter that I did on Josh Jacobs. Like, it's usually not great when a guy's entering the last year, a running back's entering the last year, and it's not the same guys who brought you there. And you're not a no-doubter, like, great running back.
Saquon Barkley. Well, even Saquon, there were trade rumors when a new word came in. I mean, that's just how it is.
Yep, absolutely. The Detroit Lions, Dalton, my question with them, speaking of great running backs, I think DeAndre Swift can be a great running back. My question with DeAndre Swift is very simple. Can he get more volume when the games are actually close? If you look up DeAndre Swift and garbage time on Twitter, you see a lot of tweets from October and September of last year when he was raking in points when his team was down by multiple touchdowns. He's my RB12. I think I should probably get him higher. But if he was on the right team, he is like RB4 to 6. He is, I think, one of the 7 or 8 most talented running backs in the league. And from a fantasy perspective, what's great about him is he is a great route runner, a very productive receiver. So on a points per game basis last year, he's the RB13, RB20 on the season because he missed a handful of games, which, by the way, that is a big question for him. Can he stay healthy the whole season? It feels like he's one of those guys that even when he's out there, you worry like on a week-to-week basis if he's going to play. That's life with most running backs, but him, it felt like he was really in that camp last season. He and Austin Eckler are the only 2 running backs that were in the top 10 in yards after the catch last year. I think that tells you what type of receiver he is from the position, which, by the way, Travis Kelce was like second on that list, which was just really funny. I don't have season-long stats to back this up, but midway through October, saw this handy stat. About 3/4 of his touchdowns came with his team down multiple touchdowns, and not just down multiple touchdowns in the 4th quarter. And then over half his receptions came in that same time too. And the next week after that, Chris Towers tweeted, it was smart of the Lions not to wait until garbage time to feature Swift for once. Can we not wait till garbage time to give Swift like even 60%? He had a 57% opportunity share last year. I'd be willing to guess it was more like 45% when the games were actually close. It felt like Jamal Williams was out touching him early in games, and then they just turned to dump downs to Swift later in the games, and it would work, partially because teams are giving you that, but partially because he is by far the best player they have on probably the whole team, definitely that offense as of right now.
Yeah. I'm in line with you on they need to feature more. This is also probably like the second or third best offensive line in the NFL.
Yeah.
So he definitely can get a lot of good quality looks behind that line. The frustrating thing is that it seems, and I've talked about it before, is offensive coordinator Lynn loves just that 1A, 1B split set, and they
That's
did it
true.
all the time.
I knew you were going to bring up Anthony Lynn in this conversation.
I just hate him so much. I don't like Campbell as a head coach. I just don't. He could do so much better with a different OC. And I mean, out of this entire offense, I do think that DeAndre Swift is the closest to a sure thing.
Yeah.
Now we get into somebody who I think is not a sure thing. It's Amon St. Who, because I don't see it. I do not understand what's going on here.
I'm out.
He's 27 in ADP. He's Jared Goff's primary target, maybe not really.
No, he's going to be the third target this year.
And
once Jameson Williams comes back,
just like with Antonio Gibson, it's important you look at how players got their points and you look at some splits. So when St. Brown was a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, so top 24, it coincided with DeAndre Swift missing weeks 13 through 16 and TJ Hawkinson missing weeks 14 through 18. Before week 11, when neither of those guys were hurt, he didn't reach 80% of the team's snaps. And when Cephas was fully healthy, he looked like their wide receiver 1. He didn't reach over 60% of the snaps. Then, and making it the worst, in weeks 12 through 18, St. Brown didn't play as outside receiver like he did in weeks 1 through 11, and he got moved into the slot, mainly because TJ Hawkinson was hurt and DeAndre Swift, their 2 underneath guys, were hurt. Josh Reynolds is a guy on this team I like.
DJ Chark, I don't like DJ Chark from a fantasy perspective a ton this year, but he's a good player who is going to be like in the wide receiver 40s, like low 50s, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And Jameson Williams will eventually be healthy and be able to play. And that puts him at maybe 4th, 5th in line when it comes to receiving here. And your only hope is that he plays out of the slot, and then you're relying on a Jared Goff-led offense. It's not going to score a ton of points. I just don't love it. I'm completely out on him. I don't think.
And I've seen him as high as like wide receiver 18, and I just cannot disagree with that enough. Just cannot disagree with that enough. You said it perfectly. So much of that production came late in the season when it was truly a who else is there? Not often does that argument work, but that was exactly what it was to end the season.
Yeah, and I'm just done on that. I'll probably talk. He'll be one of my busts for sure. But
the Packers. So Dalton, is this still the Packers offense that we know and love this year? That's what I want to know. They lose Devontae Adams, obviously, but what do we think of Aaron Rodgers? Let me just go pull up our rankings and kind of answer my own question here. Do we think he can still be a top 5 to 8 quarterback? You have him 10, I have him 8. So I'd say generally yes. You're 2 spots below that 5 to 8. I'm right there on 8, and I could even be persuaded to bump him up a little bit. If he is in that range, we are just so wrong about this offense as a whole. Aaron Jones is running back 12, which is pretty close to the right place in my mind. But when you couple it with A.J. Dillon, running back 27, which again, fairly close. But then you get to receivers. It's wide receiver 50 for Christian Watson, 69 for Sammy Watkins, which is behind defenses and a few kickers on Fantasy Pros. Alan Lazard is wide receiver 48. And Randall Cobb is 103. And Robert Tunyon's tight end 16. There's not a single guy who is even close to being a starter. I mean, Robert Tonyan is it. And even then, tight end 16 feels like you're still a ways off from starting, because even tight end 12 feels like this guy's not a starter, but I just have to start him.
Feels like he might get dropped.
Yes. So if Rodgers is a top 5 to 8 quarterback, either Aaron Jones is going to be like running back 1 or 2, and A.J. Dillon's going to be a top 12 to 15 running back, or we are totally wrong on these receivers. I want to gamble on 1 or 2 of these receivers late in drafts because it feels like there is a lot of value potentially there.
Well, we came into this with the same analysis and different endings, because I do not want to gamble on the receivers.
I know you're all on Aaron Jones. I just don't buy it. I don't buy that the targets just go to Aaron Jones. I know in games, but they have a full offseason to prepare for it now.
He posted 5 catch, 50 yards, and 0.5 touchdowns per game without Adams. He's been targeted.
How many fantasy points does 0.5 touchdowns get you?
Well, it's a good chance that you're going to get it. That's already 10 points in PPR leagues and 7.5. And then he's gotten targeted on 34% of his routes run. So I love the idea that A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones could both finish in the top 15. I think that's a very high probability. But the guy that I am tired of, Robert Tonyan, needs a little love.
Yeah, okay. I kind of walked away thinking that too.
He tore his ACL last year.
He's a training camp guy to watch. The health absolutely. You got to monitor that.
But we're a year removed from this guy scoring more touchdowns than incompletions. He had 12 touchdowns, led all tight ends 2 years ago, and had 6 incompletions. That is an absurd stat line. And I love to talk about regression, but I've talked about regression enough with Aaron Jones that I come to understand when Aaron Rodgers is calling the plays at the 3-yard line, you don't regress because he just throws touchdowns. He's not going to audible into a run play. He's going to throw it to somebody because he wants it on his stat line because he's a selfish player. And I don't care anymore. I'm taking the guys. Aaron Rodgers historically is this weird quarterback who likes to trust his own guys. He wanted Randall Cobb back in Green Bay last year, despite him being washed. I think he's going to trust the guys he has while these new guys come in and figure it out. And I just want to bet Aaron Jones is definitely going to move up in my ranks. I think he might go as high as like 8 or 7. I have to figure that out. And I think Robert Tonyan might.
Wait, do you remember you have him at RB5? You're higher at least.
I already have an RB5.
Just you're already there, my friend. I was going to say if you're moving him up, you're moving him up.
No, I'm all in. Like top 5 running back.
All right. So the Vikings. I think this one we'll probably both go a little bit long on, and then man, we are zipping through that the NFC South because there is not much I want to get to in that division as of right now. The Vikings, are we really going to get the pass-first offense that everyone hopes we get in Minnesota? They were 12th in total pass attempts last year, 16th in rushes. So, like, technically they were slightly pass-first last year. Obviously, there is much more room to go pass-first, run second. Their pass rate in 2021 was 58.4%. The Rams were 59.3%. I know if you filter out garbage time, the Rams get a little bit of a boost compared to the Vikings, but I think we're going to get more volume. I'm just not sure you should be sold the full bill of goods that this is going to be just a high octane passing offense, top 5 in pace, top 5 in attempts. Like I'm not quite there. And I would just caution anyone into diving headfirst into that in their drafts with guys not named Justin Jefferson. And I like some of the other guys on this team. I do think the key difference, this is from Ian Hart. Actually, no, sorry. This was from McNamara Dynasty. I have something from Ian here in a little bit. The Vikings ranked 11th with 53.5% of their red zone plays being rushes, and almost 92% were running backs. The Rams were 42% rushing and 58% passing, which was the 5th highest pass rate in the red zone. So you got to figure that there's probably room for more passing touchdowns. God knows Thielen was getting all the passing touchdowns in the red zone the last couple of years. We've said for 2 years now that Jefferson should be a guy that catches more touchdown passes. I think he probably does this year. I think Irv Smith is probably a guy who gets some touchdowns this year in the red zone as well. I'm not sure people should paint this as this hurts Dalvin Cook because he ranked 9th in red zone touches last year. That's a lot, but he also only had 6 total touchdowns. So like those could both regress and kind of cancel out, I think. But I think we should get more 3 receiver sets with Osborne being a little bit more viable. But for Irv Smith, the Rams starting tight end ran the 9th most routes in 2021. That's Ian Horwitz from PFF. Irv is still just 23, was poised for the breakout last year. If he gets that kind of time on the field, I think he's a home run late tight end. But the overall storyline, can we actually expect the passing boom in Minnesota this year?
Yeah, and I really hope there will be. I'm not going to go out on a limb because and this bothers me every offseason, is we take a head coach or an offensive coordinator and we take the head coaching's ideology and we go 1-to-1. And we did that for 15 years with Bill Belichick disciples and none of them worked out. And I don't like that.
Remember when Seattle was going to have a horizontal passing attack last year?
Yes, I do.
We both really thought that was going to happen.
Who would have thought that Pete Carroll sucks at coaching? But My takeaway from this is, and I'm going to probably bang this hammer all year, is Thielen is so criminally underrated in fantasy football right now.
Yep.
It is absurd. He's the wide receiver 34. In a points per game last year, he was wide receiver 7. He got injured, and I get it. He's 32. He's probably going to get injured this season.
I was going to say the one thing you just are concerned about with Thielen outside of gobble this guy ever stop catching a million touchdowns is do the lower extremity injuries start to catch up to a guy in his early 30s.
Yeah, but he's such a banging value that I just have to take him. And if he's healthy, you just start him and it goes.
Yep.
I mean, in the last 38 games he's played, he has 31 touchdowns. And then in the last 28 games he's played, he has 24 touchdowns. Over the last 2 years, here's the wide receiver touchdown leaders. Devontae Adams with 29, Mike Evans with 27, Thielen and Tyreek Hill are tied at 24. And Thielen hasn't even played a full slate of games.
If Thielen played like 10 games last year.
If he plays a full 17, and it's a big if, you are getting like a wide receiver 5-6 upside because of his touchdown potential. So just stop underrating him. Take him in the 7th round and put him in your flex until he's injured, and then go and draft like Jameson Williams in the 12th round and wait
or just draft KJ Osborne.
Yeah, there you go. You have your handcuff. That's my takeaway, and I'm tired of people treating him just because he's old. He's going to be bad.
Yep, I agree. Although, kind of like with Julio this last year, when it goes to those guys, it goes kind of quick. And with a guy like Thielen where he's in the 30s, I am totally cool with drafting him until it goes. I think it's my stance there.
It'd be different if he was a 4th round guy.
Yeah, for sure. So the NFC South, Tampa Bay. Real quick on Tampa Bay, I've got 2 things. Number one, well, first of all, this is going to be maybe like one of the teams for me to watch in training camp this year. But for now, if Chris Godwin has the ability to miss up to 2 months, which I think it could happen. This is all guesswork at this point, and this will be a training camp thing that we're watching for sure. But if that's in the range of outcomes, we're way too low on Mike Evans. He is wide receiver 10 in ADP right now. If Godwin's out for 2 whole months and Gronk doesn't come out of retirement, yeah, Cameron Brate's going to be nice, but Mike Evans is going to just crush it. Everyone's obsessing over Russell Gage, which, yeah, like he's going to be a good value. Like you can flex that guy when Godwin's out. I think we should pay a little more attention to the guy who could be a top 5 receiver for as long as those 2 things, Gronk being retired and Godwin being out specifically, are true. That's my take.
Well, and my take ties into that is I think Russell Gage is getting too much love. He was the only wide receiver in that on the Falcons last year, and he posted a 72, 786, and 4 touchdown line. Yep. I get it. They were less than stellar, but like Tom Brady is a guy who's going to throw to players who deserve it, and he's pretty good at making those reads. And we're talking all about Russell Gage in the same way people are talking about MVS with the Chiefs. He got a 3-year, $30 million deal. Definitely want him to be there.
Yep.
Tyler Johnson, Rashad Perriman, Scotty Miller, and Jalen Darden are all like quality athletes. Rashad Perriman 2 years ago, if anybody remembers, had a really big come on in that offense before the end of the season.
And I think that was last year, actually.
Yeah, that was last year. And I mean, that's just as likely to happen as Russell Gage happening. I think he's a middling talent, and people just want to pretend because he's tied to Tom Brady now that changes everything. And I just don't think it does. I know he's like wide receiver 39. I'd rather take a guy like Devonta Smith, who's going under him right now, than Russell Gage, because I think he's just more talented.
I think Gage could be a good value early in the season. You can get some startable weeks out of him. But yeah, I'm with you. Like if you can get Devontae Smith after him, that's a guy who I think is actually good.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start there. The Falcons, a team that I don't think is actually good. Is the quarterback good enough to unlock the true upside of Kyle Pitts? Whichever quarterback that is. I think that's really the only storyline that people should majorly care about. Unless Cordell Patterson goes absolutely bonkers again this season. I think we're all assuming it's going to be so much better for Pitts this year than last year. Why exactly are we assuming that? He's in his 2nd year. He personally should be better I don't think he personally was the problem last year. I think it was the stuff around him. Yes, Drake London should help him because I think Calvin Ridley being out last year hurt him because all of the attention was then shifted to Pitts. So I think that will help. But right now, he's the tight end 3. I haven't tight end 4. I know you have him at 3 as well, but I know you'll agree with me on this. What's more problematic is he is number 31 overall on the board, one spot ahead of T. Higgins, who's wide receiver 12, ahead of James Conner, Zeke, Deontay Johnson, etc. I think he could have a better year. He only had 1 touchdown. That's probably not happening again this year. But let's just look at the wide receiver 12 versus the tight end 3 or 4 the last couple of years. Last year, receiver 12, Chris Godwin, 193 points. Kyle Pitts, tight end 4, so we're comparing Pitts straight up to the receiver 12, 140. That's in 2 more games. Pitts played than Godwin too, by the way. In 2020, it was 212 to 150 in favor of wide receiver 12 to tight end 3. 2019, it was 199 to 176, and that was Darren Waller's blow up year, 2019, tight end 3. I don't want any part of Pitts in the early 30s. I don't really understand why people were so eager to predict the breakout before it happened last year. I think people are still there. I think he's going to be good, but please don't take him early 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, you took it out of my mouth. My question was, will it be better for Pitts? I'm probably dropping him to tight end 6th after doing a little research. First of all, in what world is he above Kittle? I don't understand why I did that. I don't understand why people are doing that. The big take that people are predicting for San Francisco, which is probably right, is they'll pass less with Trey Lance. Okay. And is 1 target from Trey Lance worth like 3 targets from Marcus Mariota? I don't know. Maybe it's just completely absurd to me because George Kittle, I mean, yes, Kyle Pitts might be a generational talent. George Kittle is fundamentally and has proven himself to be a generational talent.
Yeah.
Ian Hardage famously says, if we have to fight aliens in a football game, you want George Kittle tight end because he's such a monster.
I'd go with a 2 tight end set and put Travis Kelce and George Kittle out there for the record.
And yes, he only had 1 touchdown, but at the same time, his receiving competition.
His only touchdown was in London, by the way. Still no American football touchdowns yet for Kyle Pitts.
His competition got a little harder. I mean, Mariota's an athletic quarterback and can rush some in. Drake London is exactly what you want in the red zone. Brian Edwards is another guy who's a big body receiver, and then Damian Williams is a guy who can score out of the backfield. And when you put all those together, I'm not going to say like it's hard to not have more than 1 touchdown at this point, but when it comes to the entire game, he's going to be, having to vie for those targets from a bad quarterback. It's going to be another ugly year, and he's probably going to be one of those players where every year we're like, okay, this is the year. And until they get a quarterback like CJ Stroud or whoever they end up drafting with the 2nd pick, I'm not in on him, especially as high of a pick on such a bad team.
Yep, I'm with you. The Panthers, what does Baker Mayfield do for DJ Moore? I think is really the only thing that I'm too interested in right now. I don't know if I have like a full-fledged take on this yet as far as where I would move more. I'm still kind of thinking about it, thinking about this trade, thinking about where I want to rank him. But here's what I'll say. DJ Moore's career high touchdowns is 4. He's done that the last 3 years. He's put up big yard seasons each of those years. I think that'll probably stay about the same. It's not like Baker has had any massive yardage seasons for any receivers, but he really doesn't have to do any more than what he's done with Jarvis Landry one time, and then now DJ Moore's done with worse quarterbacks the last 3 years. So here's the Panthers' touchdown percentage the last couple of seasons passing the ball. 2.3% and 2.9%. 14 and 16 touchdowns, respectively, each of those 2 years. Baker Mayfield, 4.8% career touchdown passing percentage, 5.3 in 2020, which was the year the Browns were good. His career high, 26 passing touchdowns that season, and he had 17 last year, and he was definitely playing banged up, very hurt last year. So more touchdowns should finally be coming for DJ Moore. So I think it's a little bit of a boom for him. How high you should go, I'm not sure, but I think that is the storyline I'm most interested in with this team.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Right now he's wide receiver 15, and I really can't justify putting him above anybody on that list. Pittman, Williams, Allen, A.J. Brown, T. Higgins are all ahead of him.
I was listening to the CBS podcast. They were talking PPR, but one of the guys moved him up to wide receiver 6 after this trade.
Yeah, I mean, that's just absurd. Baker Mayfield is also still behind like a pretty bad offensive line, and we know his splits in pressure and out of pressure are pretty drastic. And then I love how people are just doing like this weird 1-to-1 where it's like, oh, well, Baker's going to be great now that he's out. I'm going to cheer for him, but Matt Rule's also probably going to be the second worst coach Baker's been under in his career. And I don't have a lot of faith in Matt Rule. This offense has a lot of weapons, and he's failed to do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're 3-7 in week 11, and Matt Rule's like, I'm just going to roll out Corral. I want to see what we got here. I need to save my job by looking like we have a rookie.
Yeah, that could definitely happen. I will say for Baker, if he feels scared, he should throw it to Christian McCaffrey. That's my take.
Yes, and you are a CMC owner, full disclosure.
Okay, the Saints. My takeaway here, my storyline here is how quickly does Chris Olave get acclimated? Because I think this guy has a chance to really make his ADP look quite foolish quite quickly. We have no idea if Michael Thomas will be back by week 1, and we don't know really anything about Michael Thomas at this point. We know suspension is coming for Kamara. We don't know when, we don't know how long, but let's just say that both Thomas and Kamara miss the first at least couple of games. That's a very realistic option at this point. Chris Olave has the opportunity to take an alpha role in this offense and just never give it back. Like, I think that could happen. I wrote about why he could get 100 targets in the newsletter this week, so you can read that for a little bit more, but he's just awesome. Our guy Matt Waldman compared his situation to CeeDee Lamb. Basically that he's behind one guy, Michael Thomas, who's awesome. So he's not going to get the volume. Like people said that about Lamb with Cooper in his rookie season, but he's good enough. He's going to command that volume. Will he be ready to be thrust into the wide receiver 1 role right away? That's the question, because that actually could happen. And if he is ready, a guy that young with that high draft capital, if he is ready, he's not given that role up completely.
Well, I will say the Saints indicated that they think he is with a trade up for him in a time where I would probably say they should be worried about keeping those future picks.
Yes, it was not a good trade. Good player to take, not a good trade to make.
Horrible institutional move, good player to have. Would have loved him in Kansas City. In a similar vein, my question is it finally Jameis Winston season? First and foremost,
it needs to be. He needs to win MVP this year. Otherwise, I think you owe me $75.
I think I do. This is a problem I had when I was researching this. A lot of people are excited for Terry, and a lot of people are excited for DJ Moore now because they got upgrades at quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. I think Jameis Winston might be better than both of Wentz and Baker. And I know I'm a little bit of a Jameis Winston stan, but he also has a 5,000-yard season. Yes, it was an Arians offense. Yes, he threw 35 interceptions. Good for fantasy. He also, has the number 8 quarterback rating last year when he was healthy. He had the second big-time throw rate in the NFL when he was healthy. And he had the 19th yards per attempt. I mean, he's a guy who gets work done, and it feels like we're just taking all 3 of these pass catchers there and just grouping them together and acting like there's no, real fantasy relevance. When I think someone's going to come out of that room and someone's going to be a very, very good fantasy asset, defense probably takes a step back.
I think they can sustain multiple guys. Like I know you think
Me
that too. I like Waldman's made this point. Andy Dalton has sustained multiple pass catchers for entire seasons. Like worse quarterbacks than Jameis Winston have had 2 good fantasy weapons at receiver, not even including the running back.
Yeah. No, I don't think Michael Thomas plays, just personal opinion. Don't draft him. Draft the shit out of Olave and Jarvis Landry. Like I think especially Olave. I think he's the most underrated rookie right now. I think he should be going above London. I think he should be going above a lot of these other guys. He's so good.
I still think I might take London first because his volume is more of a sure thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if Olave is the most day 1 ready guy. And if he is, that's going to be great for him because of this situation that he could find himself in. Okay.
Absolutely.
The NFC West. We're at almost an hour. We didn't quite make it. Yeah, kind of like a New Year's resolution. Maybe next time we'll hit the hour mark. But let's start with the Niners, Dalton. What is your storyline to watch for this Kyle Shanahan team?
Well, first and foremost, storyline to watch is not to read anything that comes out about the 49ers until the season starts.
Trey Lance has a dead arm, Dalton. I just saw that today.
Trey Lance, dead arm. He has arm fatigue, so Jimmy Garoppolo is clearly staying. I just need someone to explain to me why George Kittle's going around 5. I don't really understand it. Um, it it doesn't make sense. Since he entered the league, he's the number one graded PFF tight end. He is the number one receiving grade. He's number one in yards per route run. He's number 5 in yards per reception. He's number one in yards after the catch, and he's number one in targets per route run at 25%. So yes, he blocks, but also every time he runs, they throw him the ball because he's a good separator, because he can run down the seam.
It's just got to be a health thing. People worried about the health, which was a valid worry, but still.
Absolutely. But I don't understand, and I just talked about this. I don't understand drafting Kyle Pitts over him, because 12 games of George Kittle is probably going to be better for your team than 17 of Kyle Pitts.
Yeah. And look, I saw a poll that George Kittle won by a heavy margin, to be clear, but it was Dalton Schultz versus George Kittle, and I was personally offended when I saw that poll.
I'm offended too. And I think you should go over Darren Waller.
Yes.
I know Debo's really good. George Kittle is a better receiver than Debo. And it's just, if he's there in round 5 and I'm drafting, he's going on my team every time, because the upside, if he plays 17 games, he has like 1,300 yard, like 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdown upside.
Yep, absolutely. So there are 2 big storylines to me with this team, and we'll save the running back conversation for many other podcasts. How good can Trey Lance be? And I think that ties into the Kittle thing, obviously. If Lance bursts onto the scene, like some think he can, he's like a dark horse MVP candidate, which can't say it's a good or bad take yet because we haven't seen him. It wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world to me if he were not to win MVP, but like flirting with MVP consideration in week 10, like kind of the Russell Wilson special, if he were to have that type of start. And then Kittle at tight end 4 and Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 41 have a chance to be great values at their ADP. And Debo can even outperform his rank too, if Lance can be that. I also think another mystery with this team is Debo a little bit. Can he really replicate what he did last year? He had 59 carries last year. The discontent in the offseason seemed to be with the usage. He didn't want to be used as a running back. He had a great receiving season. He had 1,400 yards, which I don't think I ever thought Debo was going to hit that. But that running ability took it to another level. And if you knew you had that this year, it would make you feel safer about Debo repeating some form of what he did last year. But if Trey Lance is awesome, that quells some of the Debo concerns right there, because you feel like, okay, he can put up, even if those other 2 guys are really playing well, Debo can still have a 1,210 touchdown type of season with some rushing mixed in and be super good. So I just think, not a hot take, but the obvious take here, how Trey Lance goes is just going to really, from a real football perspective and especially fantasy, really impact how this offense is able to perform and how these guys are looked at this year.
Going to be a better deep passer than Jimmy. I mean, I'll say that one out of the gate.
Yes.
But yeah, it's going to be wild. I do think they're going to run the ball more. I think that everybody's right in that take. But I do also think that leads to a lot more efficiency and easier looks when you have a dual threat quarterback that Jimmy didn't get. Guys can't drop back in coverage, which means you get cleaner looks, and have really good separators at 3 positions in tight end and 2 wide receivers. So I think we're overstating what will happen to this offense if they run more and they pass less, and we're understating what would happen if we're all wrong and Trey Lance is an incredible passer and Kyle Shanahan lets him pass 30 times a game and only runs him 7 times a game. And then suddenly anybody who's undervalued this offense is going to be sitting on the outside of a lot of money that they could have won on the screaming values that these teams have. What Ayuk finished like wide receiver 23? He ended up finishing.
He just had such a weird season. He was like a top 15 receiver for the last 4 or 6 weeks and was like almost not even on the team for the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the season. So hopefully Ayuk could just have like a normal, solid NFL season. That's what I'm looking for this year.
Famous Evan, my guy, was almost a waiver wire drop week 4.
Hey, you know what? If you drafted him, you probably started off bad, but if you made the playoffs, he helped you. I'm sure he helped you. Okay, the Cardinals, Dalton. My storyline to watch is Hollywood Brown versus Rondale Moore. What if the answer here is option C, none of the above between these two?
AJ Green season.
Hopkins is out for 6 games, so it's an especially relevant question right now between those two guys. And I think almost everybody would say Hollywood just straight up. And if you're talking like at their ADP, I think that's where the conversation really begins. But I just think there's a very likely outcome where they're both pretty good, like top 36-ish guys, and neither one has super valuable long-term outlook because Hopkins will be back in week 7. Kyler really spread the ball out last season. Ian Hartitz had this stat. Weeks 1 through 8, when they were rolling, it was 46 targets for Hopkins. AJ Green and Antoine Wesley had 46 combined. Christian Cook, 42. Edmonds and Connor, 41 combined. Rondell Moore, 35. And their tight ends, which was his pre-Zach Ertz, were at 26. So that whole team was involved. Rondell Moore was actually the only guy on that team who was top 50 in targets per routes run. Ian pointed out that was probably purely because he was a gadget player. So I think I agree with the take that Ian had. I'm kind of piggybacking here that Hollywood is being priced pretty much at his ceiling as wide receiver 18. And Kingsbury has said multiple times, any chance he can get, Rondell Moore's improved a ton. We're going to give him the ball every chance we can get. I don't fully buy into that, and I definitely don't buy into wide receiver 18, which is, I think, higher than Hollywood has ever finished as a receiver. So I'm going with C, none of the above here, I believe.
We had similar takes. Mine was Hollywood is overrated. I stole this from Ian as well. He's going off as wide receiver 16 right now in Underdog.
Mm-hmm.
Career finishes are wide receiver 48, 43, and 23. So we're projecting him to finish higher in an offense where he's not the top dog in times where, and I think we're also overrating Kyler as a passer compared to Lamar Jackson. Yes, Kyler's a better deep ball thrower, but Lamar Jackson is one of the best intermediate throwers in the NFL and gets a lot of clean looks because of the way they run the ball.
Also, Hollywood probably finishes like wide receiver 15 last year if he just catches 3 deep passes against the Lions that he dropped.
Well, and that's where it gets funny, is he was the 7th worst player in the NFL last year in fantasy points under expectation, which means he had so many drops and so many miscues on his targets that he really left a lot of points out on the field. And then I just went and looked up like his grades, and he doesn't grade out like even close to like elite in anything.
Mm-hmm.
His PFF receiving grade, which I know there's a lot of debate on that, is 65 out of 102 receivers. His yards per route run, which is a pretty indicative stat, he's 50th among wide receivers. His yards per reception, which is where you think a guy like him would shine because he's a deep threat, he could run, he's fast, he has yards after the catch, is 66th in the NFL. And then his targets per route run, and mind you, on a less crowded offense where Mark Andrews was for a long time his only competition, is 28th in the NFL. It's 21.4%. I just don't see it. In a year where Mark Andrews was able to blow up because the Ravens had to pass so much, Hollywood became an afterthought in that offense. And I don't know why we suddenly think that the change in scenery is what was needed when the real problem was the player. And he's not the best player here. Rondell Moore was drafted by this regime. They got Hollywood really cheaply. And then DeAndre Hopkins is an all-star wide receiver. And week 7 on is probably going to just dwindle it. Zach Ertz is a guy who's always consistent in his catching ability. And then, I mean, Darrell Williams is a great pass catching back as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Hollywood can see himself as a top 4 option at the end of the year in this offense if he screws it up.
I think I overall agree with your take of the problem wasn't the situation, it was the player. I think we're going to find that out this year with Hollywood. The Rams, Dalton. Now, this is an opposite situation. Was the problem the situation or the player? Allen Robinson. Ooh. How good can Allen Robinson be in LA this year? Is he done, or does he still have a lot left to give? His ADP,
who's older, Allen Robinson or Cooper Kupp?
I think Cooper Kupp is older. I think we talked about
correct.
This. I think his ADP is wide receiver 29 this year. So was he just tanking it last year in Chicago? I wouldn't blame him if he was, quite frankly. If he's not done, if he truly still has a lot left to give, which I really I don't think we saw any indication that he was done last year. He's going to be another guy who has major value. In weeks 11 through 17 last year, Odell was wide receiver 20. That's despite 2 games and single-digit yards. And remember, he came mid-season, so you expect that kind of up and down performance for a guy that came mid. It's a miracle he was even top 20. So you expect that type of up and down from Odell. If Allen Robinson can just be that, that's already outperforming that draft spot by 9 spots. I think he can be much more. I still think he's good. And I think it's pretty reasonable to expect or hope for a top 15 type of season from A-Rob this year. I think he's got that upside. And if he does do that, that can reshape how we think of this offense a little bit. Maybe Cooper Kupp comes back down to earth a tad if Allen Robinson is still Allen Robinson.
So we had the same takeaway here, but mine was Allen Robinson to the moon. In underdog right now is wide receiver 23. I think he deserves top 16 consideration. Before his injury last season, Robert Woods was top 12 in PPR. And then at his return, like you said, Odell Beckham Jr. was wide receiver 20, and that's learning an offense on the go. The Rams were one of only 3 teams in the NFL to have 400 of their targets go to their wide receivers. They do that specifically. And then I think this can't be overstated. Allen Robinson has had top 12 seasons in the NFL as a wide receiver, and his quarterbacks going back to college are Matt McGloin, Christian Hackenberg, Blake Bortles, Chad Henne, Mitch Trubisky, Chase Daniel, Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, and then Justin Fields. It goes without saying that Matt Stafford is better than all 12 of them put together.
Yes.
And that Allen Robinson is absolutely going to go off this year. He is available in the 4th round. I will take him every time he is there. Without a doubt, I think that 2 wide receivers can finish top 12 in this offense. It's easy done. And I mean, it's just an auto draft for me. Forget about the lost years in Chicago. It's not Allen Robinson's fault. I mean, that whole team is just so bad.
Yep. Okay, Dalton, this last one, the Seahawks. This is one that we can be quite brief on, I believe. And I wouldn't be surprised if you have a similar storyline as me, which is, can Drew Lock be good enough, good being relative here, to keep Lockett and Metcalf afloat for fantasy football this year? I think if you're ranking situations for receivers in the NFL, this is probably dead last, maybe 31st.
Looking at you, Atlanta.
Yeah, it's one of those two. I think Locke is the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. I think the offensive line is bad. We'll see what Penny does, and then we'll see what the rookie can do at running back as well. But where does that leave these two who are perennial top 12 to 15 type of guys? I mean, Metcalf is wide receiver 15, and Lockett's taking a big hit at wide receiver 36 in Fantasy Pros. Should the difference first of all, I'm not sure if the difference should really be 21 spots between these two, but not really the point of this conversation right now. I think what it comes down to when you're thinking about these guys and drafting them, especially Metcalf at 15, so still a lot of great players around him on the board. How comfortable do you feel in overlooking situation and just drafting talent and hoping that either the talent can overcome the situation or the situation ends up being a little bit better than expected? If either of those things happen, DK Metcalf's a league winner in that range, point blank. But this is not a good spot to be in on paper right now.
Yeah, I will say Drew Lock somehow tanked both Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton in fantasy, and they are two. I wouldn't say neither of them are comparable to DK Metcalf, but they are very, very good players. And I have a similar takeaway from yours. Mine is that both Metcalf and Lockett shouldn't be so far apart. In underdog ADP, Metcalf's all the way down to 24, by the way.
Wow.
And Lockett's all the way down to 45.
Wow, man. In best ball, I think I would be more okay with DK in best ball because if you can balance out your receivers with some safer guys, he's going to give you some big weeks. It's just he's going to have some weeks where he has 15 yards.
God, I hope so. But I think
he's going to break like an 80-yard bubble screen every now and then because he's just that good.
Yeah, I do think that we are underrating how good Tyler Lockett is in these ADPs. He's so incredibly talented. And in my opinion, it's just going to be, if you're taking a player on this team, I'd rather draft Lockett at value. In the last 3 years, and this does include DK's rookie year, so it's a little unfair to him. But Tyler Lockett has a higher PFF grade. He has higher yards per route run. He has the only stat that DK beats him in is yards per reception. But both these guys are almost 1-to-1 in how good they are. They do things differently, but they're both incredibly good. Lockett's gotten a little older. And then if Geno Smith starts in his 4 starts last year, and again, we're extrapolating off a very small sample size, Lockett had 30 targets and Metcalf had 22. Now, Metcalf scored more fantasy points in part because he had touchdowns, but against the Jaguars, Geno Smith threw Lockett like 13 targets. So I think if you think this team's going to be anything like a startable NFL offense, I would take both players because they're underpriced. If you don't, I would probably just recommend drafting Tyler Lockett, and that's just because at that point you're drafting him as like your 5th wide receiver off the board.
Yeah, my new take, I guess, is draft Tyler Lockett because I'm looking at ADP on Underdog now, and I would not take Treylon Burks ahead of him, he was going ahead of him. I would not, even going up into the 30s, I don't think I'd take Michael Thomas ahead of him. Drake London's clear up in the mid-30s. Russell Gage, at that point in the draft, your risk is very much mitigated because he's so cheap. Like guys after Lockett, MVS, like you could be dropping MVS or Sky Moore, either one of those two at some point during the season because it's kind of a crapshoot who's going to produce in Kansas City. But even those guys have upside.
Lazard over Lockett. I mean, Russell Gage over Lockett. I just have some issues with some of these. Just Amon St. Brown over Lockett. I might even have an issue there. But again, Tyler Lockett is an incredible talent, and this will be the 3rd year in a row that I'm going to put him on my sleepers list because we just continue to undervalue the guy.
Yep. I agree with you, Dalton. I agree with you. Anything else to add before we get out of here?
I can't wait for week 1. I'm going to put so much money on the Panthers to beat the Browns. Probably more money than the Panthers are paying Deshaun Watson this year at this point.
You mean the Browns are paying Deshaun?
I'm sorry, the Browns, correct. Once his salary gets docked for not playing, we'll be there.
Okay, I was going to say, you might need some suspensions to get you there. But all right, Dalton, it is great to be back, and that is going to do it for us today. We will have a show next week. I will not be here. I think we've got a mock draft cooking. We'll see how that goes. We will obviously let you guys know on social media, but we will be back, the 2 of us, and hopefully Johnny, in 2 weeks for an AFC preview. Same show as this one, but for the AFC. Until then, give us a follow. All social media, Half Point Per Pod. Follow the newsletter at halfpointperpod.substack.com. Keep an eye on the YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon.